Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final of our CVRD 2022 budget presentations. Thank you for everyone for tuning in this evening. I have the distinct pleasure of hosting and facilitating these meetings. My name is Chris Schumacher, Manager of Communications and Engagement for the Cowichan Valley Regional District. I want to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are joining from various parts of the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, and we're all so happy to be able to gather here virtually this evening. Thank you to those in attendance for joining us. I really want to just start the evening out with a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway with the presentation. The process for this evening is we will have a presentation with a question and answer period to follow. Before we get to the presentation, though, I want to introduce the staff and elected officials that we have in attendance this evening, beginning with our staff, our Chief Administrative Officer, Brian Carruthers, our Chief Financial Officer, Natalie Weiner. We have our Manager of Finance, Tracy Bowen. We have our General Manager of Corporate Services, Barbara Mohan. For our elected officials, we have our Chair, Director Lori Nardo from Area D. We have Area F Director Ian Morrison and Area I Director Klaus Kuhn. And from the town of Lake Cowichan, not last but not least, Director Tim McGonigal. I also want to acknowledge that in attendance this evening, we have the town of Lake Cowichan Mayor Bob Day, as well as Councillor Christine Sandhu. And in attendance, I see we also have our Electoral Area G Director, Lynn Smith, in attendance. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you to all the members of the public who are also in attendance. So again, just a little housekeeping before we get underway. For those who aren't familiar with our WebEx event platform, you'll see on your right-hand side that you have the ability to open up the question and answer function or Q&A as it's shown. That is where we would like you to direct your questions that you may have at any given point during the presentation. Even right now, if there's something that's burning and on your mind, please direct that there, and we can answer those questions as soon as the presentation is over. You also see a chat feature, which you can also use to submit comments. I do want to note that we are trying to get public input throughout this whole process so that the board can make more meaningful, better decisions. And so please feel free to put comments in there, but ideally the best way to do that is by email, and you can send those comments that can get directed to the board to finance@cvrd.bc.ca. That would be the most pleasurable way for us to receive that input that we can there compile and put into the board package that will be given to the board prior to their special meetings on February 24th and 25th, where they will have their final budget deliberations. And again, just to reiterate, the purpose of the meetings are to help the public better understand the CVRD budget, provide opportunity for you to ask questions around the budget methodology, the impacts to our services, and other general questions about the budget. The dual purpose is also to enable you to provide better feedback based on what you hear and your understanding of the budget to the committee. So we really appreciate anybody who's tuning in, whether live while we're doing this or after the fact, as this is posted on our website and prior to those meetings. So thank you all so much. I will now turn it over respectfully to my colleague Tracy to give the presentation.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to set up my presentation here. Okay, this is the 2022 budget overview. The Cowichan Valley Regional District has 4 municipalities and 9 electoral areas. For 2022, we have 178 services. There are a number of completing challenges, and expectations that the board must balance when setting the 2022 budget, including how to meet the needs of the public under increasing financial constraints, increased downloading from other levels of government, resulting in increasing presence to provide additional services, aging infrastructure and increasing construction costs that exceed consumer price inflation, legislative changes and higher requirements for standard of care that put increasing cost pressures on existing services, and increasing non-controllable expenditures such as hydro and insurance. The CVRD provides a variety of services to different partners, and therefore the impact of our budgeting process on each electoral area or municipality is different. For example, the cost of the average home in electoral area F, which participates in 32 functions, is $1,556.92, but the average home in Lake Cowichan, which participates in 22 functions, is $730.31. And Area F also has 8 specified area services encompassing a variety of services such as street lighting, drainage, and fire protection. To complicate matters, some services are provided directly by the CVRD, others in partnerships with other organizations, and some take the form of grants to organizations to provide the service. The CVRD does not provide education, sidewalks, curbs and gutters, roads, policing, healthcare, or highways. These are all provincial services or municipality in the case of roads and policing in North Cowichan. For most of our services, taxation is allocated based on assessed value. Each member municipality and electoral area's share is calculated based on assessed values that are provided by BC Assessment, and within this, the distribution between property classes is determined by a fixed ratio that is mandated under provincial legislation. Requisition represented almost 40.5% of the total budget for 2021. The funding for each service is determined in the establishing bylaw, and with so many services, there is a wide variety of funding mixtures used. We can, however, broadly characterize the main types of service funding as regional, electoral area, sub-regional, and specified areas. Regional services are funded based on assessment for all 13 jurisdictions within the regional district, and a typical service that benefits the entire region, such as solid waste or general government. Electoral area services are specified to the rural areas only and are therefore shared by all the participating electoral areas on assessment basis with no municipality funding participation. An example of this is community planning, where the CVRD performs the function for the electoral area, but not the municipalities. The X on the chart indicates that the entire area participates, while the O is a portion of that area. Many of our services are sub-regional in nature, in that they provide a service for certain areas within the CVRD, and funding is shared by those participating partners, normally on an assessment basis. An example of this is the Cowichan Lake Recreation. Specified areas are set up to fund services that are provided to a number of properties that do not represent the entire electoral area, and are different in that these functions are established in response to a petition by property owners to provide service. A service area is established to encompass the properties that receive the service, such as street lighting. While taxation is a major component of the CVRD's revenue base, the CVRD has a few other revenue streams. Non-taxation revenue streams that are considered as part of the budget process include user fees and charges, permit and licensing fees, reserve funds, operating reserves and capital reserves, grants, and proceeds of borrowing. As mentioned, services funded with other revenue sources include the Community Health Network, municipal MFA debt, curbside garbage and recycling services, sewer, water, and some street lighting. The current budget approach is incremental, meaning that current activities and staffing levels are considered as core and used as the baseline for the upcoming budget. The approach uses core expenditures as the basis of the preparation of the draft budget, with requests to changes to the existing service levels being treated as supplemental requests to the commissions and committees for their consideration. Core expenditures are defined as those that are required to maintain the current levels of service, staffing, and capital, including reallocation of services with operating budgets. Supplemental requests for the purpose of budgeting are defined as items that are additions to current staffing or service levels, and any capital that requires an increase to requisition or user fees. This includes purchases of construction of new capital, the addition of part and full-time staffing positions, and changes to programming or service required increases to user fees or requisition. Staff was directed to target a 3% increase for 2022. For some services, such as solid waste and the Vancouver Island Regional Library, this was not possible due to existing service contracts. The board has had a few budget meetings in 2022 and has considered some supplemental requests. After each meeting, the CVRD budget website is updated to reflect the decisions made at the meeting. With the decisions made to date, the budget includes a requisition increase of 5.44%. The board will then hold a meeting on February 24th and 25th to review all the decisions that have been made and process for any further changes to the budget before the financial plan bylaw is brought forward in March. The increase to requisition is discussed as a total number. However, as mentioned previously, the effects of individual properties varies based on the number of factors, including property assessment and property location. Only the participants in a service area contribute to the cost of providing those services. This slide shows the impact of each municipality and electoral area for the proposed 2022 budget. In electoral areas F and I in the town of Lake Cowichan, the largest changes are for the solid waste function, general government, transit, emergency planning, and the Cowichan Lake Recreation. The electoral areas will also see an increase in the Vancouver Island Regional Library. In Area F, the average home will see an increase of $123.30. This chart, which is available on the CVRD website, shows how the tax requisition is broken down by function. In Area I, the average home would see an increase of $370.84. The town of Lake Cowichan, the average home will see an increase of $73.72. More information can be found on the CVRD draft budget website, and this is the link. A number of detailed schedules are available on the CVRD website, providing total budget information as well as detailed financial information on each of these services. The majority of the schedules looked at changes to property taxation. Parcel tax information is provided in separate schedules. Schedule A presents the changes in tax requisition. It only shows services that have a change and details the amount of the change for that service. Down at the bottom is the total difference between the general tax requisition of 2021 and that of 2022. This does not include the change for local area services, which affect only specified defined areas. Schedule B shows a change in tax requisition by jurisdiction. The change due to other jurisdictions column reflects the increase in the library requisition. Also down at the bottom of the screen, increase in local service area taxes such as fire service areas. Schedule C shows a change in requisition going back to 2015. Schedule D has a page for each jurisdiction. It lists only the services that the area participates in and shows the change for that service. Down at the bottom, it includes the local service area taxes applicable to that jurisdiction and the change in those as well. Schedule E has a page for each jurisdiction and shows the impact of the average home in that area. Schedule F is a summary of the short and long-term debt. The schedule on the website has not been updated to the 2021 debt as we haven't finished borrowing for the year. The schedule will be updated once the year end has been completed. Similar to Schedule F, Schedule G has not been updated for 2021. Finance does not usually transfer from the capital reserves until the end of the year. This schedule will be updated when year-end funding transactions have been completed. Schedule G has a portion for capital reserves and a portion for operating reserves. Again, the schedule will be updated closer to the end of the year when operating results are known. Schedule H shows assessments by jurisdiction for 3 years. The 2022 completed roll is used for the 2022 budget calculations. Schedule I shows how the requisition for an area is split between the property classes. Schedule J shows the cost for a $100,000 home and shows the portion of the total assessment represented by each area. Parcel taxes for sewer and water systems are shown on Schedule K. And user fees for sewer and water systems are on Schedule L. It is important to note that an increase to the parcel tax or user fee for a service does not necessarily mean an increase to the property owner. In many cases, new properties have been added to the service areas, thus increasing the total amount collected without having to impact an individual property. Those are the detailed budget schedules available on our website. We also have more specific detail on individual services. For each service, there is a summary sheet. It gives a description of the service, lists the amount being requisitioned for 2022, the maximum amount that may be requisitioned if applicable, and shows the split between the participating areas. This is followed by the proposed 5-year plan for the function. And lastly is the budget detailed from our accounting software showing the actual expenses for 2019 and 2020, the budget for 2021, and the proposed budget for 2022. All of this is available on our website, as much information as possible.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I will now open it up to questions, and seeing none from our attendees, I will remind you that the Q&A panel on your right, which has a field for you to type in, is the ideal way for those to come in. But while we may wait for the attendees to pose any questions that we have, I would open it up for any of our elected officials if they had any questions to staff or comments that they wanted to make at this time. Director McGonigal, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Wayner and Ms. Bowen. I did reach out after some of the budget discussions on some increases that I noted from a sub-regional function that Area F, I, and the town do participate in, Cowichan Lake Recreation. And considering the commission budget that was brought forward did not show significant increases, it was quite a shock when I looked at Schedule E and saw the increases to the town of Lake Cowichan for Cowichan Lake Recreation. They were very diligent in answering my concerns and questions, and noted that the assessment had a major portion to play within that delivery or reallocation of allotments. For instance, the town of Lake Cowichan's average assessed value of residential properties was in excess of 43%, I believe, this year. I'm going by memory. And managed forests, which both Area F and I have, did not meet the threshold for those assessment uptakes. So residential properties were the ones that would take the major hit on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm synopsing as you had mentioned. So I appreciate that you answered my questions, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the questions that may come forward on Cowichan Lake Recreation. I can contribute some of the general government to increases in regional emergency planning that all municipalities have offered to participate in regionally, and that is some significant increase, not significant, but some increases within our CVRD portion. The other ones within transit for the services that will be provided in a service connecting Nanaimo to the Cowichan Valley service, I think will help the West region with connectivity, not only to the north when it does come forward, but also through the Victoria commuter service. So transit is a major entity within the West. People rely on it quite significantly, given the ridership that we see year from year. So to both Ms. Bowen and Ms. Wayner, thank you very much for allowing me to meet with you, and virtually that is, and answer my questions.
Thanks, Director McGonigal. I did not detect a direct question within what you're saying. Was there anything you wanted finance to address?
Could they just briefly discuss the reallocation of assessment and the impact on sub-regional functions?
Hi, Chris. If actually you could give me the share feature again, I will show in 2 slides of how Lake Cowichan or Cowichan Lake Recreation has changed because of the assessed value. So looking at this screen here, you'll see that the requisition was 2.7 million, just about 2.8 million. And the town of Lake Cowichan paid $665,000. And this is for 2021. You'll notice that the requisition is pretty much the same for 2022. However, now the Lake Cowichan, town of Lake Cowichan is paying $722,000, and the other areas have gone down. And this is because of the assessed values. Now, a good example of that is if you look at the town of Lake Cowichan, the residential assessments have gone up by 45. The average for the regional district is about 35%. And so overall, the increase was 43, with the majority being in residential. And if you compare that to Area I, you'll see their residential went up by 59%, but they also went down in managed forests and farm, which shows that in Area I, they are still over the threshold a little bit of the 35%, just slightly. But the impact for Area I residents is that while they're paying less of the service, like the Lake Cowichan Recreation, for those other services, anything that would have been paid originally by those managed forest lands are now being paid for by residential homes. And the same goes for Area F. Area F is one of the more significant changes because they've gone, and as you can see, that's well under the 35%, which is the average for CVRD. But the residential homes are 40.24%, and you'll see that managed forest has dropped by about $4.9 million. And that drop in the assessment for managed forest means that those, once again, those residential homes are having to pay the difference in taxes. And even though there's a drop in how much that is paid for by those for the area. So Area F residents will be paying less of the Lake Cowichan Recreation. The amount that is actually being paid is now being paid for by residential taxpayers versus the managed forest. And I'm just going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Natalie. Do either of the other area directors have a question to ask at this time? Director Morrison, please go ahead.
Thanks. It's that last slide was pretty profound because I think I saw 60% residential percentage of the total bill and 35 for forest, and it wasn't that long ago, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that managed forest was 50 or 52% and residential was 43%. So that's dramatic. More a question and a point. I'm hoping that finance staff and I can have a discussion so that we can have our facts and our explanations somewhat synced, because it's going to be really tough for people to understand how the percentage decrease for Area F is 10%, and it is a $300,000 reduction on a $2.7 million budget. It's huge, but residential property taxpayers are gonna still take a kick in the teeth because of how the assessments have changed. So it looks really good when the newspapers and folks report the percentage changes, but it's still going to be a hit for residential property taxpayers, and they're not going to like it, and they're not going to understand it easily. So I just want to know that when asked, that finance and myself will be sort of singing from the same song sheet, so that we can keep it as simplified and as clear an explanation as possible. So just letting you know now that when we get some final numbers and we start getting articles in the Citizen about everybody's increases, I'd like to make sure that finance and myself are basically given the same explanation. And we can do that then. Thank you.
I would like to say something now as well. Of the overall CVRD assessments, Area I is now the highest, the average house price. It's the first time that Area I actually, in average property value, has gone over the value of Shawnigan. Shawnigan was always at the top, and now Area I is at the top. I mean, as good as that sounds, it's penalizing us financially, and so Area I has some of the steepest increase in taxation. And I would like to second what Director Morrison just said. Now, I'd like that pointed out in the report when we go to the public, that the assessment changes play a major role in the taxes that the people will have to pay, because many of them don't understand that. They will look at their tax bill and they know that property value has gone up, but they don't realize how much it is connected to how much taxes they pay. And I'd like to see that really pointed out, and maybe with examples so that they can understand that, because for us, like where property values have gone up substantially, it's not going to be easy to explain that. People are going to be quite upset. So anyway, that's all I have to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Kuhn and Director Morrison. I think I'd just point out that this really is the opportunity for you and for staff to explain this to the public. And so I think the explanation that Ms. Wayner gave, but also just wanted to, and your points are very valid. And so I think that this will be the best documentation and resource for residents to turn to over the next week before the final budget deliberations to understand what we're talking about and what those assessment impacts are. So I would just turn to Ms. Wayner to maybe elaborate on what she maybe already spoke about, or maybe some of the points that you've had.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen again and go back to those other slides that I was showing. And this is where Director Kuhn and Director Morrison were talking. So in 2021, 71% of all the property taxes were paid for by residential assessments. And 25%, and this is for Area I, was paid for by managed forest. Well, in 2022, of all of the total taxes that need to be collected for that area, now 15% of managed forest will be paying versus the 25, and residential assessments will now be paying 80.74. So a significant increase, a 10% increase of taxes of the total taxes for Area I will now be picked up by residential taxpayers. So if you go over to Area F, which is what Director Morrison was speaking to, in 2021, 50% of all of the taxes for Area F were paid for by residential, and 46% was paid for by managed forest. Now, if you move into 2022, you will see that it's dropped from 46% down to 35% being paid for by managed forest, and an increase for residential has gone up to 60.5%. So 60.5% of all the taxes for Area F is now paying for residential taxpayers. And this is why there is a decrease on the amount that's overall collected. And that's because managed forests will be paying much less than they paid for in previous years. And residential taxpayers will have to collect that extra funds and pay that difference.
Thank you very much for that further explanation, Natalie. I don't see, oh, Mr. Crothers, did you want to add on to that? Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to note the difference as well between a excuse me, a regional district and a municipality. When those kinds of assessment changes happen in a municipality, the municipal governments have an opportunity to reallocate the share of taxation amongst the various classes. And it's important to note that in a regional district, those classification property classes are fixed as a multiple of the residential tax rate. And so the regional district boards don't have an opportunity to adjust those tax rates to balance that back out again. So that's an important distinction. Like Cowichan, if they were faced with that same matter, could readjust what they're charging to the percentage charged to privately managed forests to equalize that out. And we simply can't in a regional district. I just want to share that.
Thank you, Mr. Crothers. I'll turn now to Director McGonigal.
You stole my thunder, Brian, but I appreciate you pointing out the differences between regional districts and municipalities. We do have that power to reallocate those mill rates, as they were once called, through different classes. And unfortunately, through the regional district, not afforded that opportunity. We also can move funds around from general to other functions as needed. There are 178 individual budgets within the CVRD that cannot be allocated from one to the other. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Within a municipality, we have much more power and authority to move funds around within entities that we provide services for.
Thanks for that, Director McGonigal. Director Morrison.
So I've got an article saved somewhere that was actually from a mayor of a municipality, and he was explaining how, and this really applies in our case, our job is to set the amount that will be taxed each year. And just a simple example, and I'll use my numbers, I'm most familiar with them. If we taxed $100, in the municipalities, they can say which class is going to pay, which percentage, because they could do that reallocation. But the province sets ours. So if last year we taxed $100, it would have been $50 to the residential property taxpayer and $46 to private managed forests. So fast forward to 2022 and just apply those numbers. If you taxed $100, it would now be 60 would be paid for by the residential property taxpayers and only 35 paid by the private managed forests. But in our case, we actually reduced that $100 amount to $90. We're actually collecting less money as far as a tax bill goes. But 60% of 90 is going to be $54. So even though I've reduced the amount, the effect of assessment is still going to result in a $4 increase to residential property taxpayers. And in this case, I think it amounts to something like 8%. So it's a numbers game, but the numbers don't lie. And it's that rigid allocation of the classes as set by the province that they won't change, that is basically causing the pain for the residential property taxpayers in F&I here.
Thank you for that, Director Morrison. I think that we have done a very adequate job of explaining the differences and really doing a great job to speak directly to the taxpayers in the areas F and I who are faced with this increased tax burden at this point. So I think this dialogue was very helpful, and I think anybody tuning in will have a very good grasp in terms of what the reasons for what they may be paying next year. I still do not see, and oh, that is not, I am not adequate. Nadine, a question coming in. Why are the managed forests paying less? What causes their contribution to go lower? I believe we have, I'll turn to Director Morrison. I think that maybe this has been quite well covered, but I would allow the director to elaborate on that.
Okay, I'll try not to get too deeply into the weeds here, but Class 7 has a complex formula, and maybe Director McGonigal might be able to add to this, but it's I believe a 3-factor formula, and it's part of the equation is based on the land value. Part of the equation is based on the harvest rates, the amount of timber that's been harvested or not. And the other factor, I believe, is the value of those that wood that's been harvested. And over the last, I think since 2018, BC Assessment has been reassessing that formula because it's been so complex. I've been doing this for 12 or 13 years, and I'm still not exactly sure how the formula works. But suffice to say, in the period that they've been reassessing this formula, they froze a really important component of that at 2018 values, and that's the land component. So when they go to calculate the assessment values in 2019, 20, and 21, the land component was frozen. Now, all land prices in British Columbia have been going up almost exponentially in that same time period. So because of that freezing of that part of the formula, it's been artificially kept down, the value, the assessment that private managed forest land pays. So specifically in my case, just in last year for Area F, we went from 46% to just under 36%. So, and even simpler, over a number of years, we went from the private managed forest lands paying half of the tax bill in Area F to now they're just paying over a third. So that's part of the rationale as to why the values or the overall assessments for forestry in electoral Area F have gone down. The reassessment of this formula and the freezing of land values for that 3-year period.
Thank you, Director Morrison. I think I misunderstood the question that was being asked, and so thank you for elaborating on that. Director Kuhn, did you want to add on?
Yes, I think what should be explained as well is that Area I now, because the property values in Area I increased much above average. So Area I is going to end up paying more on taxes per average house than most of the other regions. And that I think should be pointed out as well. And I've had discussions with some residents and they had mixed feelings. They feel good about having their property value increase, but they know there's going to be bad news afterwards, and that's a taxation. So that should be pointed out. And now Area I is paying a higher percentage of the overall cost of the CVRD than it paid before, and that is a direct result of the property value increases. Like my property increased by 64% last year, so that is very substantial. And I've talked to somebody whose property actually went up 82%. So yeah, when you have increases in property values like that, yes, you pay substantially more taxes. So that's what I want to point out.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. Director Morrison, please. You're muted, Director Morrison.
Sorry, I think there was some explanation of the effects of change in assessment in the sub-regional formula, but perhaps Ms. Weiner or Ms. Bowen could explain how the changes in assessments in the individual areas and regional functions play a role, because I haven't seen the numbers specifically, but I'm guessing that when it comes to our portion that we pay for a lot of the regional functions, that Area F is probably paying less into the regional functions than we'd paid before. So that's, you know, bonus for Area F. But on the other side of the coin, I think if Director Kuhn's overall assessed value is higher, then Area I is probably paying more of the portion of the pie for the regional functions, which is a direct result of assessment. So is that a fair analysis, Ms. Weiner?
Yeah, that is a very fair analysis, because that number of 35% overall for the region wide, if the assessed value was 35% overall, then taxes would, if you were collecting the exact same amount of taxes, it would stay the same. Where in Area I, the assessments have gone up over that 35%, and that means they now pay a larger portion. And an example, though it's not a region-wide service, it's actually the Lake Cowichan Recreations one I showed you guys earlier.
You see it there directly. I saw it. If you compare the F and I specifically, you'll see that the change is incredible.
It is. So this is 2022, where you'll see I is paying 1.1 million of the service. And unfortunately, my toggle for sharing screen is in the way of me being able to get to this. There it is. And then you'll see that Area I was 1.01. So it was paying less. Area F was paying a bit more. So this is the shift between the two. So yeah. Area F was 1 million and it dropped down to 9. And while it was 1 million the year before, it's now 1.157 for Area I for 2022. So this shows how that shift happens. And this is an assessment and a requisition that's pretty much static and staying the same. And so that's how that pie is divided.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
And on a percentage basis, it wasn't that long ago that Area F was paying, I hope these numbers add up, but Area F was paying 40% of the requisition in Cowichan Lake Rec. Area I was paying 37 and change, and the town of Lake Cowichan was paying 22% and change. And now it's changed around so that I know that the Area F is no longer carrying the lion's share of that. It's changed to Area I is paying the most towards the Cowichan Lake recreation budget. So dramatic changes simply due to the changes in assessment.
Thank you, Director Morrison. And further changes to come with the regional recreation funding changing potentially via referendum at the end of this year. So I do not see any further questions from our attendees. I very much appreciate what the discussion that's happened so far and the elaboration on the budget. Again, I really think this is going to be a valuable tool for taxpayers in areas F and I in town of Lake Cowichan to turn to better understand the budget, and hopefully we can direct them there to review this prior to tuning into February 24th and 25th deliberations. A lot to take in. It's certainly not an easy matter to understand, but hopefully we provided a little bit more light and context onto this. And so I will, before I close, just look to the floor if there is anything else that needs to be added before we sign off for the evening. Seeing no hands, thank you to the staff for another fourth presentations. Thank you to the elected officials for your time and attention. Thanks to our attendees for tuning in this late in the evening. And again, this is being recorded, will be posted to our website on our draft budget pages for residents to review. And thank you all for your help in spreading the awareness around this. So have a great evening, everyone.
Good night.
See you soon.